Right.
And the dream slash goal is that when this is all done, you'll get a huge file. I will then
Hmm.
edit it down and then I'll send you a smaller version because we'll take out all my uhs and ums and things. And if you think something is not as entertaining as it seemed when you said it the first time, just tell me and I'll take it out before I unleash it upon the world.
Okay.
Do you have any questions before we get started?
So is the general topic is going to be about this neighborhood? Is that true?
The general topic is you and this neighborhood. If somebody were to see you going down the street and wanted to engage you in conversation, what topics of conversation do you sort of want to talk to them about or have them know about you?
Yeah.
That works?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a dog.
This is Winston. So
Mm-hmm.
he's the puppy. He's like 2 years old now. We still have Della right now. Della is 15 and she's having
She
some.
has big brown eyes that captivate one as they stare into the camera.
Yeah, he's actually like pretty ticked off that I have something to do that doesn't include him. So he did this before we started too, and I even gave him a treat and said, "You got to go away." But
I see how well that's working.
yeah, he's pretty much insisting that he needs to be part of whatever it is I'm doing. So anyway, is he bothering you? Is this
No, it's
like
delightful.
okay? That's
Winston, I think Winston should be in Hollywood because Winston is grabbing the spotlight in a very not so subtle kind of way.
you think he's
Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
okay?
Oh,
Now can you hear me? He
yeah.
bopped the phone. He's trying to hang up on us, I think. Can you hear
Win-
me?
yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, he was ready for his close up and he bopped the phone with his nose. Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping he's just gonna get bored with the whole situation and go sit down or find a toy or something. But
Or
if he
maybe
finds
somebody
a toy,
can
that
walk
might be
down the
good.
street with a dog and he'll go bark at that.
Well, oh yeah, he would do that. And I have a little squirt gun that I use in case he barks.
Hmm.
Somebody walking down the street. So if he starts yelling, it won't be for very long because I'll squirt him with the squirt gun.
Okay, I think I can get started now. Those sweet dulcet tones of Oregon, my Oregon, our state song here in Oregon, tells us it's time for another episode of Wilder People. Wilder people learning about other wilder people. My guest today is Susan Bynum. Thank you, Susan Bynum, for being the first guest on Wilder People. You're probably the only person in Wilder I know of that has a dog breed incorporated into your email, and it's Beagles. Have you always had Beagles?
I had one beagle kind of accidentally when I was about 3, but someone had kind of tossed him out. And, since I was a little kid, I wanted him. He was a puppy. And he was way, way too rough for me. And he used to go and steal things off the neighbor's porch and bring it to our porch. Even though he didn't live with us, all he did was we fed him, but we didn't let him in the house because he wasn't going to be our dog. But anyway, I think that was when I fell in love with Beagles, even though he really roughed me up. And so then several years down the road, my husband and I had a couple other dogs. And then we got back to the Beagle thing. We wanted a Beagle. And whenever you've never had a Beagle or a hound dog and you think you know all about them, you don't. And so when you get them, that's kind of an eye opener.
If
Ladies,
somebody were to get a Beagle, what would be the words of wisdom that you would give them?
I always say if you've never had one, don't get one. My
Let's
words of
say
wisdom.
I have myself and have a Beagle currently in my house and it's the first 24 hours. What then would be your words of wisdom?
Okay, well, I would have to throw in some Facebook Beagle groups. That would be very, very helpful. And then I would say, kind of lose your expectations They're not a dog that is necessarily going to follow your every command. Some people think beagles are dumb, and they're not. They're very smart, but they're also very
Opinionated?
opinionated and have a strong will. And of course, if there's anything to sniff, they have a very strong nose and they're going to follow their nose anywhere and everywhere. But they're very affectionate. You probably won't sit by yourself in a chair ever again if you get one.
As we
Um,
have seen or heard.
they're food motivated, so you can teach them. And he knows, just the basic stuff. We're working on some more, but he's still two. That's kind of young and silly still for a beagle.
Do
Made a
you
lot of progress.
recommend getting more than one and having a pack of beagles for their emotional health?
Absolutely. That's the other thing that I was thinking is that our first one, we just had the one and we got her when she was really young. And there was a lot of good about that. But if you're going to be gone at all, then they're going to get very lonely because they are pack dogs. And so having two always kind of helps with that. They might not, always want to be that close to each other, but still they know they're in a pack and that's important to them. And we put Winston in a crate just because he's still young and silly and we don't know what he might do. But he still knows that Della's there and he doesn't feel as alone as he would. And one reason that we got him was because originally we had Elizabeth and Della. And then when Elizabeth passed away 3 years ago, Della just really had almost a breakdown and she just wasn't doing
Oh,
well at
you
all.
got
Being pack dogs, they get used to each other and after a while, and then they, like I say, as long as they have a pack, that's really what is the most important thing.
moving right along. Before you were here in Wilder, where were you?
We lived in Gresham, just outside of Portland, for 30 years.
Mm,
And yeah, and we had a house built there, raised our kids there. And then when we decided that we needed to start looking for a place at the coast, we had this place built about 3 years before I quit working. Used it for a little holiday place. And then 4 years ago, we moved here full time.
what was your first impression when you drove up the hill and saw the little plateau surrounded by trees?
Well, it's funny because when we started talking, I started looking online. I couldn't find anything. And finally, I came along this little neighborhood of all these little cute little cottages. And that's what, that I wanted. And so we drove up here and, well, we just thought it was kind of magical. I mean, and there was only like less than half of the building done when we moved here.
Was the college already up here?
The college was up here. Several of the little houses were up here, but on our street, there were 3 houses when we decided to pick out a lot. And that's when pretty much the rest of the neighborhood as we know it now happened during that time, during that next 2 or 3 years. The houses were built.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I grew up in St. Helens, Oregon, and so I went to high school there. I went to college in Vancouver at Clark Community.
Moving right along once again. Oh, I see you have a lot of interesting art in your room with you. So art has been part of your life for a while?
Yes, it has. And something I've always loved and appreciated. And for years when I was growing up, felt totally unworthy and so would never try. And then it wasn't until once I was an adult and I was in a position with working with kids, and then it just kind of all fell into place. It all came to me. And
I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a sec? So it was almost like the kids gave you permission to try art because they were just kids or something like that?
yes, absolutely.
What kind of art did you connected with kids?
Well, I just kind of started showing them and teaching them about the artists I liked. I mean, that's how it all started. And so some
I'm
of
sorry, I forget. Who are those artists?
Van Gogh, Rothko, The thing is that once I really got into teaching, then I was open to discovering more too, and I started finding artists that weren't necessarily someone that even spoke to me, but it was interesting to learn. It was kind of fun. I taught in an emotionally disturbed classroom, and so one thing that was interesting is so many artists that we know often suffer some emotional disorder. And that was something that I could really use to speak to the kids too. And that's what I did. And it just grew and grew. I'm not totally self-taught, but a lot of it has been learning on my own. But I've also taken professional classes. I worked in an emotionally disturbed classroom for over 16 years, and that was K through 6 in a public school system.
What artists in the classroom seem to have the biggest impact on the kids?
The first thing, and there's several, but the first thing I think that pops into my head is Pollock, because when we studied Jackson Pollock, we talked some about his depression. We didn't go into his alcoholism or anything like that, or we didn't go deep into his depression, but we talked about how he was sad and that he was often upset and that he would often act out in public, which of course is something that all of our kids had issues with. Whenever a person has a problem like acting out, they're going to feel really alienated, even though they're kind of the people that are alienating others, but they're going to feel unwanted and unloved and kind of unworthy. That's just going to come with that. And so they knew enough about Pollock that he was sad, that he, had some problems, that they could really identify with that. But then on the other hand, Pollock's paintings, when we would watch the videos of him painting and we would see his art through video naturally, we would see it hanging in the museums and see people going and looking at it and learning from it. And that probably made them the most excited. I had come up with a plan. This was back when we could still have safe rooms in our classroom. And a safe room is just a room covered with foam. The floor is covered with foam, the door, everything is covered with foam. And we were losing that privilege because someone else had misused their safe room in a different school district. And so we knew we were going to lose it. And so I just thought this is a perfect opportunity to let them go absolutely nuts with the paint and make their own Pollock. And so we did that. We did it as a class because it was a huge canvas. And so everyone got turns to go in there and, drip paint and fling paint. And
What a great idea.
oh, it had to be one of the highlights of my career, really, because I mean, they just loved it. It was great. They later, because as the kids would grow and move on out of our classroom, we got to where there were only a few left that had been there for the Pollock painting. And this one student in particular, he just had loved Pollock. I mean, just felt like he could identify. And so when he graduated from 6th grade, I gave him the canvas to take home and have in his room. And I heard several years later that he still has it. So yeah, it was worth it.
Very cool. Any of them like into Van Gogh or anything that would reflect somehow the person's inner life, or are they mostly abstract?
Um, no, the one artist that we had the most trouble with, I can tell you, is Mark Rothko, because Mark Rothko he was a genius in what he did, and his way of layering paint and having all the paint there, but not having all the paint there. That's the only way I can really explain it, I guess, is that one cannot reproduce a Rothko. There's so much technicality to it that I felt like our least successful. But there again, it was still a learning experience for the kids.
Did they
We
have
need
to
to
learn
study it.
patience or?
Oh, absolutely. And they had to learn, well, that's kind of a letdown. You know,
Mhm.
that that's not as great as I thought it was going to be. It's not as great as, and it wasn't as great as I thought that it should be either. But the point is, it was just technically beyond us, and that's okay. That's part of life. You learn that and you move on. And you mentioned Van Gogh and Matisse in his painting with scissors. I think those two were probably the kids probably felt like they were the most successful with those artists because, if you think about Van Gogh, that his work is, well, it's not perfect. And so I think it's a little more childlike. And so
In teaching that kind of art in that situation, can you teach the lesson of when something is done or when you can stop, or it doesn't have to be perfect to stop?
well, we had to deal with that all the time because especially with our kids that it's hard to stop. It's you want to keep, they wanted to keep going and one of the things that we had to learn is okay, you need to know when to stop and when to walk away. And that was always a big part of our lessons. New kids would come in and there was a couple things that the our regular kids would tell them. And one is that you need to know when to stop or just walk away and look at what other people are doing and maybe come back and maybe I'll speak to you a different way or give you an idea of something else you could do. And then also that it wasn't okay in this classroom to just slap something down on paper and call it a day because that just wasn't going to fly. And, it's one thing to come from me. And of course, that's how it started was that I taught them that, they needed to be invested in this. Of course, we did have a specific time period where we did art. And so they were expected to be busy with some form of art that whole time. And we had 2 classes a week that were regular. It didn't take long before even the kids that didn't feel like they wanted to give their all or to invest in this piece or the time to do it, they wound up really getting involved in it. And yeah, we had some tears, we had some tantrums, some acting out, but we had some room clears. That wasn't the only time we had room clears because we were in a mostly disturbed classroom. But
How many people are in the class typically?
when I was there, it was never more than 10.
Hmm.
There was a lead teacher, and then there were 2 assistants and I was one of the assistants. But the art was all mine. I did all the lesson plans. It was all me, and I felt really blessed for being able to work with a lead teacher that would let me do that, let me have the time, let me have his classroom to do that. But he was
Did you have any formal instruction in art instruction before you started?
like I say, I have some, but mostly self-taught.
Hmm.
And I guess in the beginning, I felt kind of lesser because I wasn't uh, totally formally taught.
Now that
But
you have done this for a while, what do you look for in a good lesson plan?
well, the first thing I think is really basic is that I want it to be doable. And I'm thinking about whom I'm working with. So, whichever classroom I'm in, that it's doable for them. Like I say, my job was in a class K through 6th grade. And so that's a little something extra too, because obviously you don't want to bore the older ones. Or you don't want to be above the younger ones. You don't want, there's all these different factors. So it was something that would have to appeal to the class I was dealing with, both ability wise and just interest.
Is
Some of
there
the art,
something you have found that is almost always of interest? Conversely, is there something you kind of look at and go, this will never work? And can you give me examples of those?
Uh, Van Gogh was a safe bet. The Matisse was with cutting as far as the different ages you would have, that could be a little bit of an issue. And so I would always have some pieces cut out previously. And then the younger ones would rely on working with the color and the placement, the composition, while they would do some cutting with scissors. Obviously, that wasn't they weren't going to be as advanced as someone else or as quick. Like I say, Van Gogh was good. One thing about Van Gogh is that, I mean, you can get prints in like IKEA. Everybody knows Van Gogh. He's in commercials and everything. So I find a lot of times that that's a good place to start is with an artist that a lot of people are aware of. And especially when you're dealing, well, even when you're dealing with adults, you could have a class full of adults and you could say, okay, tonight at our wine and sip, we are we're going to do a Van Gogh painting. And it's not totally foreign to them. And that's helpful. So they're already thinking, okay, I've seen that before. Oh yeah, that guy, he's kind of messy, that, kind of messy guy.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe I can do this. And so that was a help. One thing we never tried, although I did teach about these artists and we did look at their art and study their art, would be someone like Turner or Constable, or some that were just really painted very realistically. And I found that working with the people that I worked with, that it was better to have some imperfection as the expectation.
Mhm. I have another question for you. Did you do anything more with textures and layering different materials and incorporating that into some kind of art?
Yes, we did actually. There were times where we were studying Modigliani, and he's the artist that typically everyone was very long and thin, their face and their neck was long and thin, their body. And they usually just had kind of blank eyes. But that was a good place to start with drawing. We used Sharpies
Mhm.
and drew and painted our self portraits on canvas. And then later, I took them and put a backing on them and stuffed them. And so we had matching art pillows that were look like us in some kind of way. That was fun. Well, I wanted to say something about Picasso because
Okay.
Picasso was another favorite for the kids. And one thing, the way that I got their attention about Picasso was that he has like 14 names, I think it is. And so Pablo is in there and Picasso is his last name, but he actually has 14 names listed as his legal name. And so that was kind of, well, that's interesting. And Picasso, his work was some that really kind of appealed to kids. And, I'm thinking of like his sculptures and like his goat. I left his she goat and all that kind of stuff appealed to the kids. There, I suppose, like almost any other artist, there were things that I wouldn't teach about Picasso to kids, but yeah, there was a lot that you could. And Picasso had, well, lovers, for lack of a better word, I suppose. And he was married also, and he did paintings of these women. And so that really got into the whole abstract. I mean, like totally, that's probably what comes to mind when one thinks of Picasso, is some of his abstract paintings, especially of the women. And again, we talked about what some of these women might have been feeling, because sometimes they were in tears, they were not happy. And that was part of their relationship in real life with Picasso, is they weren't always happy. They were often in tears. And he would paint them in this, some might say, bizarre abstract fashion. But we really got to where we almost felt like we knew some of these women, that we felt for them. And again, we would, talk about the emotions always.
Cool. I'd like to pivot a bit and ask, if you were to be a painter who's not yourself, who would you like to be?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know. I would probably say Picasso because he had so many different styles. When he started it, there's a painting he did at 14 years old of a christening, I believe it is, and so realistic and so like perfectly done. And you don't often equate that with some of the other Picassos that you see later on. But I think he would have to be one just because he was capable of so many different styles
Hmm.
and very, very good at everything he did.
Well, moving right along, I've noticed there's a lot of artists up here in Wilder.
There seems to be, yes.
Is there a way in which artists can support each other up here in a community way?
Well, I think so. And I think it might be a way to get to know each other a little bit more. There's a lot of my neighbors I know, but I have not seen their work. And even if someone is an established artist, I had this idea a while back, and it's kind of a takeoff on little libraries that you see around neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to have a little box library like that, except for to have it be an art library
Hmm.
instead of books. An art box where we could add things to it or take a piece away, and everything would be labeled so we would know who had completed our lovely piece of art. And this could be really simple. I know several artists around Newport do rocks, paint rocks, or it could be just as simple as that. Or I was thinking of tiny paintings, which, could be like 2 by 2 or 4 by 4 inches, and just kind of start it out like that and see where it goes.
That sounds like a cool idea. How would things be exchanged?
Well, I thought it would be just honor system.
What a great idea. Do you
Thank
have
you.
any timeline or plans to have this happen?
I have plans. I don't have a timeline right now because I've asked my husband to build it for me. And so I know what I want it to look like. It's very simple. I don't think he'll have any trouble building it. It's just him taking the time to do it. But I would say I would like to have it done by November.
Well, that would be way cool.
Yeah.
All right. Last time we spoke, you talked about getting your paints out and um, giving that a whirl around the neighborhood, so to speak. Um, one of the things okay, here's the question. One of the things I'd liked about Wilder when we came up here was that it was both very sort of rural and trees and eagles and things, but there
Mhm.
does seem to be a sense of artistic community up here. Is that your impression as well?
It is. I think that's really true of Newport in general. And that's something that we really like too. I mean, I knew when we were looking for a place, I knew I wanted to be in kind of an artistic community. Again, feeling very unworthy of that, but still wanting to benefit from seeing and hearing what others did.
It
So,
worked.
yeah, it did work. He does not like that. So, yeah, I to you to get back to Wilder, we felt that also when we first came up, being in the middle of a forest and not being up on a hill, having the flatness was quite special, and all the walking trails and everything, and then knowing the developers plan for building up the whole neighborhood, I like that. I like that we now have our own little tap room It feels a lot like an English pub because people that go there, you just get to know them. You get to know the people that work there because they tend to stay. And so we like that. You don't, it doesn't have to be a drinking issue. They serve food, but we like that. And somewhere down the road, there's supposed to be more expansion, more buildings, and more businesses. And I think to a certain point that would be nice. I don't think it's ever going to get out of hand up here. So that's great. But I do like the feeling of a little boutique kind of neighborhood because we are very separate. And
What is your favorite sort of local walk? I mean, do you like to go down behind the park and around the bridge, or what's your favorite wander around kind of?
it's always been down through the park and down the bridge. I won't go by myself that way anymore because one time, this is a few years ago, but they had, the watch out for cougar sign. And it kind of threw me. I was by myself and I realized that my husband wasn't even in home. He was working in Portland. And so I probably, just in case, shouldn't go. I didn't even have a stick with me. So I will walk with him there, but I don't do that by myself anymore just because of that. I've never went the other ways, like through the gate and all that. My husband does that a lot. Goes up around the college a lot, and that's where he's met some of his bear friends.
Whoops, I've lost you. Let me see what. Well, try talking again.
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, good.
I forget what we were talking about. I think
Well,
you were talking
we were
about
just
how
going
you
back
wanted
to
to be a
wild bear.
Picasso.
Well, that was what you put in my mouth.
Ah,
You said you could be any artist, who would you be? And I'm, well, Picasso, because, he was pretty well rounded. Um, oh, but you had mentioned, had I gotten back into art, and I haven't, but I'll tell you what, I have my table set up. And I have, in fact, the phone is sitting right now on a whole bunch of different art books, but I feel like I'm making progress. It's just always that first try. Because if in your head you feel like you're a failure before you start, well, then there's not a whole lot of reason to start if one can make themselves pick up a brush or a pencil and start. Well, then you often feel like, oh, hey, this kind of reminds me of the old days. This isn't so bad. Maybe I still can do this. And so that's the point I'm at right now, where any moment I might pick up a pencil and be off.
and saying to yourself, huh, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Or I could fiddle with this some more and make it work.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's another thing when I was teaching is that oftentimes there would be someone would make what they felt like it was a mistake, or it might even be just a big glob of paint on the paper where it didn't belong. And one of the things about being an artist is that you need to learn how to make that work and that you almost always can. That's the thing about art is different than technology or math. Art is something that it can just happen and it might not be in your head when you start, but something beautiful can still come out and happen. And even if there's been a so-called mistake happen. So that's another thing that as we went along that the children that had been there for a while would always remind the new ones when they would start to melt down is that, like, not yet, don't melt down yet because it could probably be saved. And usually with somebody working with the student, it could be saved. And so that brings us to something that I hadn't mentioned, but art really is so important, to people in life, and especially as they go through school and learning. And if art was, in my opinion, if art was a bigger deal starting out and going all the way through school, even learning could be different. And I certainly believe that kids could do better in other subjects too if they really were able to have art.
This is something suddenly about me, but perhaps it can be drawn into a larger context. In the science classes, it was pretty clear that if you memorize 70% of the facts, you'd get a C, and if you memorize 80% of the facts, you'd get a B. And but in a history class, you just have to remember, say, 2 facts and to be able to construct an argument about it, and you can get an A without having to memorize every fact about the War of 1812, for instance.
Right.
And I think art is kind of the same way. You can extrapolate from what you know and get something, whereas in math,
Right.
actually, we have gone on for about an hour, so that's about a good length for this, I think. Do you have anything you would like to say to your fellow Wilder residents?
Oh, just that, I enjoy the neighborhood. I enjoy the people here. And yeah, I think we're all pretty fortunate to be able to live here. We're very fortunate, actually.
And you like the Eagles?
I do like the Eagles. And of course, that was one of the draws for us too, was wow, we have our resident Eagles and deer and elk
Elk are
but
really big.
they are.
I
They
mean,
are.
I was
They're very
surprised when
well
I
raised.
saw my first elk. And
Yeah.
I mean, deer are small. They're kind of accessible. But an
Yeah,
elk,
deer
you go,
are dainty. There's something dainty and sweet about a deer, even a boy deer. But the elks are just very well made. They're like a big football player or something. You have to take
yes.
them more seriously. So you can't see me right now, can you?
Nope, you are.
That is so good because he's standing with his front paws on the table, his back paws on my shoulder, and his bum kind of angled towards me.
So he's telling you the interview is over and it's
I
time to
think
play with
so. He's
him.
looking out the window, so I think he's like, "Come on, let's go do something outside."
Well, Susan Bynum, this has been a pleasure and a joy. Thank you very much.
Well, I enjoyed it too after all that stress. Yeah, and then I was a little concerned about Winston because I know him, so I knew
And
he was
so
going
do
to
the
be
rest of us now.
here. Yeah. So anyway, well, thanks for wanting to interview me. I did
And
enjoy it.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, that's it for this episode of Wilder People. Questions, comments? You can email me at libraryguy@earthlink.net. If you would like to participate in Wilder People and be interviewed, you can also shoot me an email at libraryguy@earthlink.net. That's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.